Have you ever imagined that a tax war between the U.S. and Canada could drive up food prices, disrupt the tourism industry, and even push Alaska's economy to the brink of collapse? Trump signed an executive order imposing a 25% tariff on imported goods from Canada. The goods affected include steel, aluminum, and other industrial products. The stated reason is to protect U.S. industries from unfair competition and address issues related to drug smuggling through the northern border. However, these measures are not simple. The U.S. is not only confronting Canada, but now this war has entered a new phase, directly threatening Alaska's economy, which heavily relies on trade routes through Canada. Immediately, Canada responded strongly.
Following a dollar-for-dollar approach, will be imposing, as of 12:01 a.m. tomorrow, March 13, 2025, 25% reciprocal tariffs on an additional $29.8 billion of imports from the United States.
Canada imposed a $30 billion retaliatory tariff on U.S. goods. The affected products range from fruit juice, wine, household goods, to cosmetics and paper products. However, these retaliatory measures aren't stopping at the federal level. Provinces in Canada, including British Columbia, BC, Ontario, and Quebec, have started rolling out their own strategies to counter U.S. tariffs. We must pay particular attention to British Columbia, the largest province on the western side of Canada, which has introduced an extremely bold retaliatory measure, a tariff on U.S. commercial trucks passing through the province to reach Alaska.
Is set to introduce legislation that would allow the province to charge U.S. commercial trucks driving to Alaska through BC. Premier David Eby made the announcement shortly after the U.S. paused tariffs on some Canadian goods.
This could lead to an increase in shipping costs for goods from the U.S. to Alaska, which in turn would raise the prices of essential items like fresh food, cosmetics, and electronics. This is not an easy measure. According to experts, if this measure is enforced, shipping costs will skyrocket, and you can imagine this increase will be passed on to the prices of consumer goods, making life difficult for Alaskan residents, especially those living in remote areas where road delivery is mandatory. To better understand, you need to know that Alaska depends on the Alaska Highway, a route approximately 2,450 kilometers long, running through British Columbia and Yukon, connecting Alaska to the rest of the U.S. Every year, 80% of goods transported from the U.S. to Alaska must pass through these routes. The new tariffs on U.S. trucks will drive transportation costs up significantly, making essential items like fresh vegetables, fresh meat, milk, and other goods much more expensive. The issue doesn't stop at shipping goods. Alaska's tourism industry, a key economic sector for the state, will also be affected. Most cruise ships traveling to Alaska must stop at ports in Canada before continuing their journey.
I think it's his demented way of going, oh, I can negotiate if I put tariffs on things, but I don't support it. And the people don't feel that way with each other. We notice the effects. There's a lot of Canadians that are...
With strong retaliatory measures from Canada, especially British Columbia, Alaska could face an economic crisis. The transportation system, supply chains, and the tourism industry could all be disrupted. The Alaska government needs to work with Canadian leaders to address this issue as soon as possible. Otherwise, Alaska will continue to face severe consequences for prices and the economy in the coming months. Stay tuned to the video, as the upcoming developments will leave you shocked and you won't want to miss the far-reaching effects of this trade war on the economy and our lives. Donald Trump wakes up to an economic disaster? Shocking truth. Stock market plunges over 330 points. 56% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy. Europe strikes back on tariffs, vows strong retaliation. U.S. Department of Education slashes nearly 50% of its workforce. But while all of this is happening, what is Donald Trump doing? Stock market in turmoil. What is Trump focused on? The U.S. stock market is in shock. Dow Jones plunges over 330 points in a single morning. Investors panic. Big businesses grow uneasy. They need answers. They expect a response from the White House. But does Trump offer a solution? The answer is no. Instead of announcing an economic plan, Trump logs onto social media, and instead of addressing the crisis, instead of discussing financial stability, he praises Elon Musk. Wow. People love Elon, a great patriot. Trump posts. But it doesn't stop there. Trump hosts a PR event at the White House promoting Tesla while the stock market is crashing. The question is, why is Trump focused on Elon Musk at this moment? Is this a deliberate distraction from the real issues? Tariff strategy. Is the U.S. hurting itself? The world is not staying silent about Trump's tariff policies. Europe fights back. The European Union announces a retaliatory tariff package worth 26 billion euros. Canada also refuses to back down. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen issues a strong statement. Tariffs are a burden on businesses and consumers. We will not stand idle. Europe refuses to negotiate. They are ready to respond aggressively. And Canada is no different. They won't succumb to pressure from the White House. We will take strong measures to protect the European economy. So what impact does this have on American businesses? Top CEOs are in panic mode. They are flooding the White House with calls, demanding answers. But even Trump's own economic advisors are unsure where his policies are heading. So, in the end, are these tariffs really protecting the U.S. economy, or are they isolating America from the global market? Shocking. Solution. Annexing Canada? Amid the chaos, Trump and his allies propose an idea. That sounds unbelievable. The best way to avoid tariffs is to make Canada the 51st state of the U.S. It may sound like a joke, but this is exactly what was declared. Howard Lutnick, Trump's close advisor, went on television and said, "If we want economic unity, we should absorb Canada into the U.S." How did Canada react? The Canadian Prime Minister immediately fired back. Canada is an independent nation and will not accept any form of coercion. Is this a real economic strategy or just another way to divert attention from more pressing issues? Widespread crisis. Who is paying the price? Prices are soaring. The cost of raw materials is skyrocketing. American consumers are now paying more for food, gas, and essential goods. But that's not all. The U.S. Department of Education has just announced nearly a 50% workforce reduction. Millions of students are at risk of losing access to education programs. Schools across America are facing teacher shortages and severe budget cuts. A reporter confronts a Republican senator with a direct question. Who will protect disabled students when education funding is slashed? The response sparks outrage. The states will handle it. But do states even have the budget to cover these cuts? Is this a logical policy? Or just the White House avoiding responsibility? Where is the U.S. economy heading? Economic experts are speaking out. CNBC reports, a top economist makes a bold statement on live television. What Trump is doing is completely insane. This is not an economic strategy. It's pure chaos. What will the next move of the Trump administration be? Can the U.S. economy withstand these growing uncertainties? This story is far from over. Stay tuned for the next developments. The U.S. imports over 4.3 million barrels of oil from Canada every day, 60% of all U.S. oil imports. If Canada follows through on its threat to cut exports, gas prices could skyrocket, refineries could shut down, and the U.S. could face an unprecedented energy crisis. For decades, the U.S. and Canada have been deeply connected in energy trade. Over 90% of Canada's oil exports flow directly to the U.S., traveling through massive pipeline networks and shipping routes. And here's why it matters. U.S. refineries, especially in the Midwest, are built to process Canadian heavy crude, not the lighter oils from other countries. This trade benefits both sides. Canada gets a stable market, while the U.S. gets a reliable oil supply without relying on unstable regions like the Middle East. But now, tensions are boiling over, and Canada is rethinking its commitment to supplying America with oil. Recently, trade disputes between the U.S. and Canada have heated up. Canadian officials have suggested that if Washington doesn't change its tariffs and trade policies, they might cut oil exports. And here's the thing. This isn't the first time a major oil-producing nation has played this game. Russia and Saudi Arabia have both used oil to pressure other countries economically. But unlike those cases, the U.S. and Canada are deeply interdependent. Cutting oil supplies would create massive consequences on both sides. If Canada follows through on its threat, the U.S. would have a serious problem. Over 50% of U.S. oil imports come from Canada. U.S. refineries aren't designed to process oil from other regions. Switching would be expensive and time-consuming. Finding alternative oil sources would cost more and take years to implement. The result? A spike in gas prices, economic disruptions, and a potential supply chain crisis. If Canada actually follows through, the impact would be instant and severe. Gas prices would skyrocket. The U.S. relies on Canadian crude to keep gasoline prices stable. With a sudden drop in supply, prices at the pump could surge overnight. U.S. refineries would be stuck. Since most refineries are built for Canadian heavy crude, they can't simply switch to Middle Eastern or South American oil without costly adjustments. Higher import costs. Buying oil from more distant suppliers means higher transportation and insurance costs, adding even more pressure to prices. Supply chain shock. Industries that depend on oil, transportation, agriculture, manufacturing would all see rising costs, impacting consumers nationwide. And here's the big problem. There is no quick fix. If Canada shuts off its oil supply, the U.S. would have limited options. Ramp up domestic oil production, the U.S. could increase oil drilling and fracking, but this takes time, and regulatory hurdles could slow things down. Turn to the Middle East, the U.S. could increase imports from Saudi Arabia or Iraq, but that comes with risks, geopolitical instability, and higher costs. Invest in alternative energy. While renewables are growing, they can't replace oil overnight. The U.S. still needs crude oil for transportation, manufacturing, and even electricity production in some areas. No matter what, the transition would be painful, and Americans would feel it at the gas pump and in their wallets. While the threat is real, Canada would also suffer. Over 90% of its oil exports go to the U.S. Cutting that off would cause massive financial losses. Shipping oil elsewhere isn't easy. Canada doesn't yet have the infrastructure to export large amounts to Europe or Asia. Oil market instability. If Canada disrupts supply, global oil prices could surge, but that doesn't guarantee Canada would benefit. However, if tensions keep escalating, Canada could take partial measures like limiting exports to put pressure on the U.S., prioritizing new trade partners in Europe or Asia, increasing tariffs on U.S. energy imports to counterbalance trade disputes. If this crisis isn't resolved, the long-term effects could reshape the energy market. The U.S. could shift toward full energy independence, meaning more oil production, but also higher costs and environmental concerns. Canada could invest in new export routes, making it less reliant on the U.S. and increasing ties with China, India, and Europe. Global oil prices could remain volatile, affecting economies worldwide. At the end of the day, one thing is clear. Neither the U.S. nor Canada can afford a full-scale oil trade war. February 2025. The Trump administration slaps a 20% tariff on Chinese goods, escalating trade tensions. China retaliates hard, cutting U.S. imports while strengthening trade ties with Canada and the European Union. The result? American farmers and businesses lose a multi-billion-dollar market, while Canada and Europe cash in. Was this a strategic miscalculation by the U.S. or part of a bigger game plan? Canadian oil replaces U.S. supply. For decades, the U.S. was China's top supplier of crude oil and natural gas. But in March 2025, after Washington hit Canadian oil imports with a 10% tariff, Ottawa found a new buyer, Beijing. China immediately ramped up oil imports from Canada, primarily through the Trans Mountain Expansion, TMX pipeline. This infrastructure upgrade boosted capacity from 300,000 barrels per day to 890,000 barrels per day, opening a direct, cost-effective route to Asia. 50% of Canada's crude oil exports now flow to China, shifting Beijing's long-term energy reliance away from the U.S. LNG Canada, the new supplier for Beijing. It's not just oil. Liquefied natural gas, LNG, is another sector where Canada is stepping in to fill the void. The LNG Canada project, one of North America's largest LNG export facilities, is set to start operations in 2025, with an export capacity of 14 to 26 million tons per year. Previously, the U.S. was one of China's largest LNG suppliers, but after Washington imposed trade restrictions, China shifted to Canada, Qatar, and Australia to diversify its energy sources. The result? Canada is now cementing its role as China's strategic energy partner, gradually replacing the U.S. China cuts U.S. agriculture imports. China, one of the world's largest agricultural buyers, has dramatically scaled back U.S. imports since 2023. The most impacted sectors, soybeans. In 2016, the U.S. supplied 40% of China's soybean imports. By 2024, just 18%. Meanwhile, Brazil and Argentina now account for 74%. Wheat, corn, and cotton. Once key U.S. exports to China, these crops are now being replaced by South American and European suppliers. Spain and the Netherlands, the new pork kings. China has also significantly increased meat imports from Europe, particularly Spain and the Netherlands. Why? Stronger food safety regulations, more stable supply chains, competitive pricing versus U.S. exports. In 2023 alone, EU pork exports to China surged by 35%, while U.S. pork exports plummeted due to tariffs and stricter Chinese inspection policies. For American farmers, this shift is a nightmare. Losing China's massive demand means overproduction, falling prices, and declining profits. American farmers are taking the hit with China. No longer buying U.S. agricultural goods, American farmers are facing oversupply and price drops, shrinking profits, financial strain, and potential bankruptcies. Smaller farms are at the highest risk as they lack the resources to pivot quickly. U.S. industry loses a key market. It's not just agriculture. America's industrial sector is feeling the heat too. China is cutting investments in the U.S. Tech giants like Google, Tesla, and Intel are losing Chinese market share. China is shifting its partnerships to Canada, Europe, and BRICS nations. The long-term impact? A gradual decline in U.S. global influence. This trade war is reshaping global commerce. Canada and the EU are winning. They're capturing billions in lost U.S. trade. The U.S. is losing ground. American farmers, tech companies, and industries are feeling the squeeze. The big question, will the U.S. shift strategies to regain lost ground? Or is this the beginning of a long-term decline in U.S. economic dominance? If Washington doubles down on tariffs, it risks further isolating American businesses from global supply chains. Meanwhile, Beijing's aggressive trade diversification is creating new alliances that could permanently reshape global economic power. The longer this standoff lasts, the harder it will be for the U.S. to reclaim its lost influence. If this person wins, I'm moving to Canada. Tens of thousands of Americans are leaving their homeland, and the numbers are only growing. These are not the unemployed or the homeless. They are tech professionals, scientists, entrepreneurs, and intellectuals, people who have directly contributed to America's progress. What is making them lose faith in the future of the United States? According to the latest data, the number of Americans seeking to leave the country has reached an all-time high. In the past, after every election, we often heard statements like, "If this person wins, I'm moving to Canada." But this time, it is no longer just meaningless threats. This time, they are taking action. Immigration consulting firms and citizenship application services are overwhelmed with record-high applications. Ireland reports a 50% increase in American passport applications within just 1 year. Germany's Max Planck Institute has seen a surge in applications from American scientists and professionals. It's not just individuals. Entire families are seriously considering leaving the U.S. They worry about their children's future, stability, and living conditions. And most importantly, they no longer believe that America is a safe place for them in the long term. So, what has driven them to this decision? Feel that Trump's policies have made them unsafe in their own country. First, protections for vulnerable groups have been severely reduced. Numerous LGBTQ+ immigrant and minority rights protections have been dismantled. This has especially impacted families with transgender children or LGBTQ+ members. They fear their children will be stripped of their basic rights, face discrimination, and even violence, with no legal protection to defend them. Second, intellectuals and skilled professionals are fleeing. Scientists, engineers, and doctors, the very people who could help the U.S. grow, are now seeking better opportunities abroad. Countries like Canada, Germany, and Ireland have become ideal destinations for highly skilled Americans. Germany's Max Planck Institute has reported a record surge in applications from American researchers. Third, many Americans no longer feel safe. Gun violence, racial discrimination, and political unrest have created an unstable environment, making daily life unpredictable. The Trump administration's relaxation of gun laws has made it easier for more people to access firearms. Mass shootings have become more frequent, particularly in schools and residential areas. Many parents fear for the safety of their children, and they refuse to wait until things get even worse. But this isn't just a social crisis. It is triggering a major economic disaster. When highly educated individuals, young professionals, and skilled workers leave America, the consequences are severe. First, the U.S. is experiencing an alarming brain drain. The technology, healthcare, and scientific research sectors are losing critical talent. Skilled professionals are being recruited by other countries, while the U.S. has no clear strategy to retain them. Second, the population is becoming unbalanced. As young workers leave, the labor force shrinks, while the aging population grows rapidly. This means that the U.S. will face a massive financial burden in supporting pension funds and Social Security programs. Third, consumer spending and investment are plummeting. When high-income individuals leave, businesses lose customers, the economy loses growth momentum, and investor confidence declines. A drop in consumer demand could trigger a chain reaction, leading companies to cut jobs and reduce local investments. If this trend does not reverse, will the U.S. still be able to maintain its position as the world's #1 economy?